The cold bit into her bones. But it was the betrayal that truly froze her heart. They bound her to the sacrificial stone, offering her to the monster haunting the Forbidden Ridge. What they didn't know was the beast they feared was the Alpha King they had treacherously overthrown. The iron chains were heavy, slick with frost, and unforgiving against Genevieve's wrists. She stumbled as the rough hands of her own packmates shoved her forward through the knee-deep snow. The howling woods lived up to their name tonight. The wind whipped through the barren, skeletal trees, carrying with it a sound that was half shriek, half sob. Genevieve did not cry. Her tears had dried days ago in the freezing dungeons of the Crescent Moon packhouse. At the head of the grim procession walked Alpha Gideon Cross. He wore a thick cloak of dire bear fur, his posture rigid and arrogant. He was the man who had seized power 10 years ago in a bloody coup, and the man who was now condemning Genevieve to a gruesome death. "Keep moving!" snapped Beta Leaf, shoving Genevieve between her shoulder blades. She slipped on a patch of black ice, her knees slamming into the frozen earth. Gideon held up a hand, halting the procession at the edge of the tree line. Before them lay the bloodstone, a massive, flat monolith stained dark with centuries of old sacrifices. Beyond the stone, the treacherous incline of the Forbidden Ridge vanished into the swirling blizzard. This was the boundary, the territory of the cursed wolf. "Bind her," Gideon commanded, his voice barely carrying over the howling wind. 2 guards hauled Genevieve to her feet and dragged her toward the monolith. They threaded the heavy iron chains through the rusted rings embedded in the stone. As the icy metal locked around her ankles and waist, Genevieve locked eyes with the Alpha. "My father died defending the true king," Genevieve spat, her voice trembling not from fear, but from a deep-seated rage. "You are a usurper, Gideon. You offer me to the beast because you fear the sterling bloodline. You fear anyone who remembers what you did." Gideon stepped closer, his heavy boots crunching in the snow. He reached out, his leather-gloved hand grabbing her jaw with bruising force. "Your father, Roderick Sterling, was a fool who chose the losing side. And now, his daughter will serve a higher purpose. The beast demands a tithe. It has grown restless, Genevieve. Its howling keeps my people awake at night. Giving it the daughter of a traitor seems like poetic justice." "The goddess will judge you," she whispered. Gideon sneered, leaning in close so only she could hear over the wind. "The goddess abandoned this pack the night I slit King Kaelin's throat and took his crown. There are no gods here, Genevieve, only predators and prey. You are merely meat to keep the monster at bay." He released her, turning his back. "Leave her. The blood moon rises." The pack members didn't hesitate. Driven by primitive terror of the beast that roamed the ridge, they scrambled back down the mountain path, their torches quickly disappearing into the blinding white snow. Genevieve was alone. The silence that followed was absolute, save for the whistling wind. The moon, heavy and bloated with a crimson hue, broke through the cloud cover, casting an eerie, blood-red glow over the snowy peaks. The blood tithe was a myth that had become a terrifying reality over the past decade. Every few years, when the beast's attacks on the borders grew too vicious, Gideon offered a sacrifice. None ever returned. She pulled against her chains, but they held fast. The cold was beginning to seep into her core, her fingers growing numb. She closed her eyes, praying for a swift death. She hoped the cold would take her before the monster's fangs did. Then, the snow began to crunch. It was a slow, deliberate sound, heavy paws pressing into the frozen crust. Genevieve's eyes snapped open. Emerging from the blinding curtain of snow was a nightmare made flesh. The wolf was impossibly large, the size of a destrier horse, with a thick coat as black as the midnight sky. But it was the scars that made her breath hitch, The beast's snout and left flank were marred by jagged, silvery lines of healed tissue, signs of a brutal, near-fatal battle. It stepped into the red moonlight. Its eyes were not the mindless, rabid yellow of a feral rogue. They were a piercing, intelligent silver. The beast circled the bloodstone, its massive head lowering as it sniffed the air. Genevieve pressed her back flat against the freezing stone, her heart hammering wildly against her ribs. She braced for the strike, for the agonizing tear of teeth through flesh. Instead, the great wolf stopped directly in front of her. Hot breath washed over her face, smelling of pine and copper. The silver eyes bored into hers, and for a terrifying, dizzying moment, Genevieve felt a spark of recognition. The beast wasn't looking at her like a meal. It was looking at her like a ghost. With a sudden, violent movement, the wolf lunged. Genevieve screamed, but the jaws didn't clamp down on her throat. The beast snapped its massive teeth around the rusted iron ring embedded in the stone above her head. With a sickening screech of metal and a display of monstrous, supernatural strength, the wolf ripped the iron fixture straight out of the ancient rock. It did the same for the chains binding her ankles. Genevieve collapsed into the snow, free but completely bewildered. The wolf nudged her shoulder with its massive snout, let out a low, rumbling huff, and then gently clamped its jaws shut around the thick wool of her winter cloak. With effortless grace, it hoisted her off the ground, throwing her across its broad back. Before Genevieve could scream or struggle, the beast launched itself up the steep incline of the forbidden ridge, carrying its sacrifice into the heart of the blizzard. The journey was a blur of biting wind and terrifying speed. Genevieve clung to the thick, coarse fur of the giant wolf, terrified that if she slipped, she would plunge to her death in the jagged ravines below. They travelled for hours, climbing higher into the treacherous peaks where no crescent moon patrol dared to venture. The air grew thinner, the cold more profound. Just as Genevieve felt consciousness slipping away to the freezing temperatures, the beast leaped over a massive fallen redwood, and the landscape opened up. Nestled in the cradle of two jagged mountains lay the ruins of Ethelgard, the ancient, ancestral keep of the Blackwood Kings. It was a sprawling fortress of dark stone, half swallowed by snow and time. One of the main towers had collapsed, but the central keep still stood, formidable and intimidating against the stormy sky. The wolf carried her through the shattered iron portcullis and into the grand courtyard. It bounded up the snow-covered stone steps and pushed through a heavy oak door that hung loosely on its hinges. Inside, the grand hall was cavernous and remarkably warmer. A massive hearth dominated the far wall, where a roaring fire was somehow already blazing, casting long, dancing shadows across the worn tapestries. The beast lowered its shoulder, allowing Genevieve to slide off onto the dusty stone floor. Her legs, numb from the cold, gave out instantly, and she collapsed. The giant wolf didn't attack. It paced in front of the fire, its breathing heavy and labored. Genevieve watched in stunned silence as the blood moon outside began to set. The first pale light of dawn breaching the high, shattered windows. As the morning light touched the beast's fur, a horrific sound echoed through the hall, the sickening crack of breaking bone and shifting anatomy. The wolf threw its head back, letting out a roar of agony that slowly morphed into the scream of a man. Genevieve scrambled backward, pressing herself against a heavy wooden pillar as the beast's dark fur receded, sinking into skin. The monstrous limbs shortened, snapping into new human joints. When the brutal transformation ended, a man knelt on the stone floor, gasping for air. He was broad-shouldered and heavily muscled, his skin pale in the firelight. Tangled, shoulder-length black hair hid his face, but as he slowly pushed himself up to a standing position, Genevieve saw the same jagged, silver scars that had marred the wolf's face. He pulled a heavy fur mantle from a nearby chair, wrapping it around his waist. He turned to face her. His eyes were still that piercing, luminescent silver. You shouldn't have stopped fighting them, Genevieve. His voice was a deep, gravelly baritone, rough from disuse, yet carrying an unmistakable cadence of authority. Genevieve froze. How do you know my name? The man walked slowly toward her, his movements stiff from the agonizing shift. He stopped a few feet away, towering over her. You have your mother's eyes, but your father's stubborn chin, he said quietly. Roderick used to bring you to the training yards when you were but a pup. You used to chase the wooden practice swords. Genevieve's mind raced. The history, the legends, the coup 10 years ago. King Cailan Blackwood had been declared dead, assassinated in his sleep by Gideon Cross. His body was supposedly burned to ash. She stared at the scars on his throat, a brutal, raised line that looked exactly like a lethal blade wound that had somehow healed. You're dead, she whispered, her voice trembling. Gideon killed the Alpha King 10 years ago. Gideon tried, Cailan corrected, a bitter, humorless smile touching his lips. But my bloodline is old, Genevieve. Older than the usurper understands. When he slit my throat with a blade coated in wolfsbane and dark magic, it didn't kill me. It broke my humanity. It locked me in the form of a beast, a feral monster trapped on this ridge, unable to return to my people. Genevieve struggled to comprehend. But you're human now. Only here, Cailan said, gesturing around the ruined hall. The magic in the stones of Ethelgard is the only thing strong enough to push the curse back. When the sun rises, within these walls, I am Cailan. But the moment I step past the courtyard, or the moment the sun sets, I become the monster again. Gideon knows this. He knows you're alive? Genevieve asked, horror dawning on her. Of course he does, Cailan growled, pacing in front of the fire. Why do you think he sends the blood tithes? It isn't to appease a mindless beast. He sends me the innocent people of my own pack, coated in fear and blood, hoping my wolf will tear them apart. He wants to break my mind. He wants the beast to fully consume the man, to make me a murderer of my own subjects. Because if the true king is lost to madness, the magical ward that protects his stolen crown becomes permanent. Genevieve felt sick. The sacrifices, the men and women she had mourned over the years, were part of a psychological torture designed to break the rightful king. And she was the latest pawn. He chose me because of my father, she realized aloud. He chose you because Roderick's blood runs in your veins, Cailan said, stopping to look at her, his silver eyes flashing with an intense, burning light. Your father was my blood-sworn general. The bond between the Blackwood and Stirling lines is ancient. Gideon didn't just send you to break my mind, Genevieve. Cailan knelt beside her, his large, scarred hand gently brushing a frozen strand of hair from her cheek. The touch was unexpectedly tender, sending a strange, warm jolt through her freezing body. Gideon is a fool who plays with magic he doesn't understand, Cailan murmured, his gaze dropping to her lips before meeting her eyes again. He sent the one person whose bloodline holds the key to breaking the curse entirely. Genevieve stared at Cailan, the weight of his words hanging in the drafty, frigid air of the ruined keep. The firelight flickered across his scarred chest, highlighting the brutal history written on his skin. The key, she echoed, her voice barely a whisper against the howling wind outside. How can my bloodline break a curse born of dark magic? Cailan walked toward a crumbling stone table in the center of the hall, sweeping aside a layer of snow and debris to reveal an ancient map carved into the rock. Before the Crescent Moon Pack was a unified people, we were warring clans. The Blackwoods were warriors. The Stirlings were mystics. It was your ancestor, Lady Beatrice Stirling, who bound the Alpha power to my bloodline using a sacred oath. She tied the strength of the wolf to the humanity of the king. Gideon's dark magic severed that tie, isolating the beast from the man. He looked up, his silver eyes locking onto hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. Gideon thinks he sent you here to be my final meal. He believes that if I consume the last living heir of the Sterling line, the severed tie will be permanently destroyed, and the beast will reign forever. He wants me to finalize my own damnation. Genevieve's hands trembled, not from the cold, but from the sheer cruelty of the usurper's plot. And what happens if you don't kill me? What happens if the tie is mended instead? Kaelan stepped closer, his imposing figure casting a long shadow over her. To mend the tie, a Sterling must willingly offer their blood to the Blackwood King, not as a sacrifice, but as an equal, a soul bond. It requires absolute trust, Genevieve. If you bind yourself to me, you bind yourself to the monster as well as the man. I will not ask that of you. Even if it means you remain cursed? She asked, searching his rugged face for any sign of deception. She found none. Only a bone-deep exhaustion and a quiet, enduring nobility that Gideon could never hope to possess. I have lived in this torment for 10 years, Kaelan said softly, reaching out to gently trace the line of her jaw. His thumb brushed against her pulse point. I would suffer 100 more before I force a woman to bind her soul to mine out of fear or obligation. You will stay here during the day, where the magic of Ethelgard keeps you warm and safe. Tonight, when the sun sets, and I become the beast, you will hide in the crypts. When the blizzard breaks tomorrow, you will take my human clothes and walk down the eastern ridge to the neighboring Silver Pine territory. They will grant you asylum. Genevieve looked at the man who had been the rightful king of her people. She remembered her father, General Roderick Sterling, who had died with Kaelan's name on his lips. She remembered the terror her pack endured under Gideon's iron-fisted rule. I am not leaving, she stated, her voice steady and resolute. Before Kaelan could argue, a sharp, unnatural sound pierced the quiet of the hall, the loud, distinct crack of a black powder musket echoing from the courtyard. Kaelan's head snapped toward the heavy oak doors, his instincts flaring. They shouldn't be here, he snarled, rushing toward a pile of rusted weaponry in the corner. Gideon's men never cross the ridge. They know you're human during the day, Genevieve realized, terror spiking in her veins. Gideon didn't just send me as a sacrifice. He sent a hunting party to finish the job while you're vulnerable. The heavy oak doors exploded inward, splintering under the force of a battering ram. Through the swirling snow stepped Commander Richard Hastings, Gideon's most ruthless enforcer, flanked by a dozen heavily armed mercenaries. Beside Hastings stood a man who made Genevieve's stomach churn with betrayal, Caleb Montgomery, her former betrothed. Caleb had sold her out to Gideon to secure his own position within the Alpha's inner circle. Well, well, Hastings sneered, his flintlock pistol leveled at Kaelan's chest. The usurper's myths were true. The great beast of the Forbidden Ridge is nothing but a naked, scarred man shivering in the ruins of a dead kingdom. Caleb's eyes darted to Genevieve. Gideon was right. The beast didn't kill her. It tried to keep her. He raised a silver-tipped crossbow. Kill the king. Bring the girl back to Gideon. He wants to execute her himself for colluding with the enemy. Kaelan didn't hesitate. With a feral roar that echoed his wolf form, he kicked a massive stone bench toward the mercenaries, shattering the legs of 2 men. Hastings fired his musket, the silver bullet grazing Kaelan's shoulder. Blood, dark and human, sprayed across the ancient stone floor. Kaelan grabbed a rusted broadsword from the floor, moving with terrifying speed despite his injuries. He cleaved through the closest mercenary, his raw strength compensating for the dull blade. But he was only a man right now, lacking the supernatural healing and impenetrable hide of his wolf form. Another mercenary lunged, slicing a dagger across Kaelin's thigh. The king stumbled, parrying a blow from Hastings' heavy saber. He was fighting like a demon, placing his body entirely between the attackers and Genevieve. But they were overwhelming him. "Genevieve!" Caleb shouted over the clash of steel, leveling his crossbow directly at Kaelin's back. "Step away from him. You're a traitor's daughter. But if you come quietly, I can beg Gideon for mercy on your behalf." Genevieve looked at Caleb, seeing the cowardice and ambition rotting his soul. Then she looked at Kaelin, bleeding onto the stones of his ancestors, fighting a hopeless battle simply to give her a chance to run. Her father had died defending the true king. She would not let that sacrifice be in vain. She sprinted toward the center of the hall, grabbing a fallen mercenary's silver dagger from the floor. "Kaelin!" she screamed. Kaelin shoved Hastings back and turned toward her, his chest heaving, silver blood seeping from his shoulder wound. Caleb fired the crossbow. The silver bolt embedded itself deep into Kaelin's side. The king dropped to his knees, gasping in agony. "No!" Genevieve slid across the stone floor, throwing herself in front of Kaelin as Hastings raised his musket for the killing blow. Without a second thought, Genevieve took the silver dagger and sliced it deep across her own palm. The pain was sharp, but the surge of adrenaline drowned it out. She dropped the blade and slammed her bleeding hand over Kaelin's heart, pressing her blood directly into the jagged silver scar left by Gideon's betrayal 10 years ago. "I, Genevieve of the House of Stirling, offer my blood, my soul, and my loyalty to the true king of the Crescent Moon," she shouted, her voice echoing with a strange, resonant power that seemed to shake the very foundations of Ethelgard. "I bind my fate to yours, Kaelin Blackwood. Let the tie be mended." For a fraction of a second, the world went entirely still. The roaring wind outside ceased. The crackling fire froze in the hearth. Hastings, Caleb, and the mercenaries stood paralyzed, their weapons suspended in midair. Then, a blinding, ethereal light erupted from the point where Genevieve's hand pressed against Kaelin's chest. The ancient magic embedded in the stones of Ethelgard responded, humming with a frequency that vibrated through Genevieve's bones. Kaelin threw his head back, letting out a sound that was no longer a scream of agony, but a roar of absolute, unbridled power. The shockwave blasted outward, throwing Hastings, Caleb, and the mercenaries backward off their feet. Genevieve was shielded by Kaelin's massive frame as the magic enveloped them. The silver bolt in his side was violently pushed out by his rapidly healing flesh, clattering onto the stone. The dark magic that had tainted his veins for a decade evaporated like ash in the wind. Before her eyes, Kaelin shifted. But this was not the agonizing, bone-breaking torture she had witnessed at dawn. This transition was fluid, majestic, and instantaneous. Standing before her was not the feral, scarred beast of the night, nor the broken man of the day. It was the true alpha form, a towering, magnificent werewolf with midnight black fur that gleamed with health and vitality. The jagged scars on his face were gone, replaced by an aura of intimidating authority. His eyes were no longer the wild silver of a cursed monster, but a brilliant, glowing gold, the mark of a sovereign in complete control of his spirit and his beast. Kaelin looked down at Genevieve, his golden eyes filled with profound gratitude and fierce protectiveness. Through the newly forged bond, she could feel his thoughts, clear and resonant in her mind. "Thank you, my queen. Stay behind me." Hastings scrambled to his feet, his eyes wide with absolute terror. "Shoot it!" he screamed, fumbling to reload his musket. "Shoot the beast!" But Kaelin was no longer just a beast. He was a king reclaiming his territory. He moved faster than the human eye could track. In one fluid motion, he swiped his massive claws, shattering the muskets and throwing the mercenaries across the room like rag dolls. He did not kill them blindly. He struck with the precision of a seasoned warrior, disarming and incapacitating Gideon's men in seconds. Caleb Montgomery dropped his crossbow and turned to run, slipping frantically on the icy stones of the courtyard. Kaelin vaulted over the debris, landing silently directly in Caleb's path. The giant wolf bared its teeth, a low, rumbling growl vibrating in its chest. Caleb fell to his knees, sobbing and begging for mercy. Kaelin simply swatted him aside with the flat of his paw, knocking the traitor unconscious. Finally, Kaelin turned his attention to Commander Hastings. The enforcer was backing away, holding a useless, broken sword. With a commanding presence, Kaelin stepped forward. He didn't tear Hastings apart. Instead, the massive wolf shifted back into his human form, the transition as effortless as taking a breath. He stood naked, unashamed, and radiating raw power. "Tell Gideon," Kaelin commanded, his voice a lethal, vibrating bass, "that the blood tithe has been accepted. The curse is broken, and the true Alpha is coming to collect his crown." Hastings scrambled backward, turning on his heel and fleeing into the blizzard, leaving his unconscious men behind. Kaelin turned back to Genevieve. She was leaning against the stone pillar, exhausted but smiling. He walked to her, wrapping his thick fur mantle around her shivering shoulders before pulling her into his arms. The heat of his body was intoxicating, and the bond between them pulsed with a deep, unbreakable warmth. "We ride for the pack house," Kaelin said, pressing his forehead against hers. "Tonight, the usurpation ends." The descent from the Forbidden Ridge was swift. With the curse broken, Kaelin carried Genevieve on his back in his wolf form, navigating the treacherous mountain paths with ease. By the time they reached the border of the howling woods, the storm had broken, revealing a sky blanketed with stars. News of Hastings' terrified return had already spread through the Crescent Moon pack. When Kaelin and Genevieve emerged from the tree line, they found the entire pack gathered in the main village square, torches held high, murmuring in fear and confusion. At the center of the square stood Alpha Gideon Cross. He was dressed in his battle armor, gripping a silver broadsword, his face pale and twisted with rage. Kaelin did not attack from the shadows. He walked openly into the square in his majestic wolf form, Genevieve seated proudly on his back. As the pack members saw the magnificent, unscarred beast with glowing golden eyes, gasps rippled through the crowd. The elders dropped to their knees. They recognized the aura of the true Alpha, a power that Gideon had never possessed. Kaelin let Genevieve slide down before shifting back into his human form, now dressed in the dark leather garments they had salvaged from the mercenaries. "Gideon Cross," Kaelin's voice boomed across the silent square, echoing off the wooden houses. "Your reign of terror is over. The dark magic you used to steal this pack has failed." Gideon laughed, a frantic, hysterical sound. "You think you can just walk back in here? I am the Alpha. I have ruled for 10 years. He raised his sword, looking frantically at his guards. "Kill him! He is an impostor." None of the guards moved. They looked at Gideon, then at Kaelin, feeling the undeniable, magnetic pull of their true liege lord. "They answer to the bloodline, Gideon," Kaelin said, drawing the ancient broadsword he had taken from Ethelgard. "And the bloodline has returned. I challenge you for the leadership of the Crescent Moon, Alpha to Alpha, to the death." Gideon had no choice. To refuse would strip him of his rank instantly. With a roar of desperation, he charged, swinging the silver sword in a deadly arc. Kaelin parried the blow effortlessly. The battle was fierce but brief. Gideon fought with the frantic energy of a cornered rat, while Kaelin fought with the disciplined, overwhelming power of a king who had endured 10 years of hell. With a swift, brutal disarm, Kaelin sent Gideon's sword spinning into the snow. He kicked the usurper's knees out from under him and brought the edge of his blade to Gideon's throat. "This is for Kaelin Blackwood," Gideon spat, glaring up with venomous hatred. "No," Kaelin replied softly. "This is for Roderick Sterling. and for every innocent soul you sent up that mountain." With one swift motion, justice was served. The usurper fell, his dark reign bleeding out into the white snow. Silence descended on the square, heavy and complete. Then an elder stepped forward, bowing deeply. "Welcome home, King Cailan." One by one, the entire pack dropped to their knees, their heads bowed in submission and relief. The 10-year nightmare was over. Cailan turned to Genevieve, extending his hand. She took it, letting him pull her to his side. He raised their joined hands in the air, the blood bond between them glowing faintly in the torchlight. "The crescent moon is whole again," Cailan declared, his voice carrying the promise of a new dawn. "And you will bow to your new queen, Genevieve, the savior of our pack." As the wolves howled their loyalty to the night sky, Genevieve leaned her head against Cailan's shoulder, knowing that the sacrifice meant to destroy her had instead given her a kingdom, a mate, and a love that had conquered the darkest of magic. Did the tale of Genevieve and the cursed king keep you on the edge of your seat? If you loved this werewolf romance filled with dark magic, betrayal, and a love that conquers all, smash that like button. Don't forget to share this video with your fellow fantasy lovers and subscribe to the channel for more epic, heart-pounding stories. Comment below what you want to hear next.